All right, so the video I want to make for you guys today is some of the most critical components you must nail if you want your brand to actually scale to $1 million a month. The reason I'm doing this is because we've had probably 8 brands this year that we have scaled to $1 million a month, and several of those have had several repeating $1 million months or more. And it got me thinking, and I did a training inside of our mentorship group, what are the components that they all have that others don't have? And so what I want to do is I want to show you some of the most critical components every brand has that makes it to $1 million a month, because then once you see those things, you'll never be able to unsee it. I can never unteach you these things, and they are the critical parts to growth and success. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through the 7 critical parts you need to scale. Now, these are all off the back of every brand that we've worked with this year. Many of them have gotten to $1 million a month. Like I said, we've done 8 so far this year, which I'm pretty pumped about. And it got me thinking, what are those things? Because they're things that if you miss it, it's actually going to be a massive bottleneck that's going to keep you back from growing. But if you actually hit these 7 things, typically your growth is a lot easier than if you did have it. So for example, typically when brands come to us, one of the things that we analyze are these 7 things. And if a brand doesn't fix those things, I can guarantee it's going to become the obstacle that keeps them from continuing to grow. So let's dive right in. What's the first one? Well, the first one is you have to have a healthy balance of returning revenue. So this is a really important one. And the reason why this is an important one is because a lot of brands who are brands that people buy from them one time. So for example, like wedding bands, we've had a brand that we used to work with and they sold men's wedding bands. Most of the time, people only buy one. What that means is you have to rely on first purchasers only giving you profit on the first sale and not having repeat business. But then if you're a consumable, let's say, for example, you're a drink or your supplements or your beauty, consumable nature of the product is built into it. So it's almost built in to guarantee you're going to have returning customers as long as it's a good product and people want to use it, right? And that's a critical part. So for the brands that don't have the consumable built-in nature, they have to do other things. But as a baseline, what my team looks for at a minimum, and this is important, so you can take this to the bank, is you must have 30% at a minimum of your revenue coming from returning customers. It must be. Now, you can look at it over 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, 120 days, but over that time window, you need to see a minimum 30%. Now, I'm not saying it all has to come from email or SMS or push notifications, but you gotta have that. I cannot begin to tell you how many brands we worked with that did not have this and they were very hard to grow. And there's often why growing more, it didn't actually equate to more profitability. A lot of our brands we work with that actually have this, more growth actually equals more profitability. So, because what you want, and this is probably what you want to look for, is 2 things. Number one, let's kind of come up with a quick graph real quick. Let's say you're going to have this color is going to be new revenue. What you want to see as you're growing, as you see new customer revenue going up, you need to see, so let's call this returning, you need to see returning customer revenue slowly following suit. If new's going up, you got to see returning going up. However, and this is where I see a lot of brands really get screwed, is as they grow, depending on their product, depending on what people buy, and this actually happened to a brand of ours very recently, that their new customer revenue was going up, but the returning customer revenue was just staying flat. It was a horrible scenario. And the reason why is because even though they were a beauty brand, they had a product issue. So what that meant was no matter how many new customers they acquired, the fact that people weren't coming back and staying on subscription meant that was the biggest flaw in their business model. So, because what you want is if you have, for example, this much that you can rely on. So if I can rely on every single month, 30% of my revenue coming from returning revenue, what that means is it becomes very easy for example, for me to forecast, if I want to make, for example, let's say I want to make $500,000 a month. I want to make $500,000 a month. That's what I want to make, 500K. It becomes quite easy to then forecast. And if you watch me on this channel for any amount of time, you can use cohorts to forecast. If I want to forecast that, man, I really want $500,000, and if this is held constant over the last year, 2 years, what that means is I can safely rely on at least $150,000 of that to be from returning. And then the difference, which would be the $350K, would be new. So it makes it quite easy for you as you're growing to say, okay, for me to have $500,000, because this ratio is constant, well, I know that to get to this number, I have to at least spend the amount of money required to hit 500K, which my ratio means 70%. So 350K is going to be from new. But the amazing part is you can say, because I know this holds constant, I can rely on $150,000 to be returning, which can be mainly profit. And that's where a lot of our brands that hit this are wildly profitable, is because as we're growing, we keep an eye on this new versus returning customer, because as long as you're growing and the difference between these is holding constant, dude, you will make so much more money with more volume than you will playing it safe. But if this is getting wide, if the difference is getting wider, you get new customers, but it's not following suit and returning, that's when you need to pump the brakes. You need to hold off and fix that problem. Because if you don't fix it, you will literally scale yourself into oblivion. I've seen that many times. So if you watched a previous video that I released not too long ago of how we actually took a brand and got them to $1 million a month in 60 days, this is why we could do it. This is the main reason why. I didn't show it in that video, but I did show the breakdown in the P&L and how that looked. That's why we could do it, because when they came on board with us, they were doing like $400,000 or $500,000 a month already. And we saw, man, like their returning revenue is so good. The only thing stopping them from scaling to $1 million a month is, number one, obviously the creative strategy and how we execute the acquisition across Google, across Meta, across TikTok. But really, as long as it was holding constant, we just kept scaling. And so over 60 days, as we scaled, we saw this ratio between new and returning was holding constant. So we just kept scaling, and they ended up making $80,000 more profit with more volume. Whereas if they came to us and they looked like this, and obviously we couldn't do that. So the first one is you have to find a way to have returning revenue be at least 30%. If you're in a moment of scale, so for example, we have a friend of ours that has a CPG brand, and for them, they're in a moment of scale. And so for a short period of time, as they're investing so much in new customer acquisition, it's okay if this doesn't follow perfectly in suit, but over a lagging 2 or 3 months, you better start to see an increase in returning customer revenue. Otherwise, that's a big problem. Now, what are the things that can get you more new customer revenue? Well, so it really depends on the industry you're in. So for example, if you're like a CPG brand, it's baked into it, right? CPG, which means like it's a good, so that's like a drink brand, a food brand, right? So it's really baked into it. So really that's for you, it's like subscriptions, right? If you are a fashion brand, this is the critical part, is consumable isn't built into fashion. Like people aren't wearing out of the fashion clothes within like 30 days, right? So instead you have to do it based off new launches, new colors, new patterns, new styles. And that's why all of our fashion brands we work with, at a minimum, once a quarter, we tell them to launch a new product or a new collection or a new style. You have to. So once a quarter. So what that means is it may be for like 1 to 2 months, returning revenue is kind of low. But because they have built in something new, what we know is once a quarter, we can expect a really big spike in returning revenue, which then averaged over the course of the year equals 30%. And so that's really critical. Now, for other brands, for example, it really depends on if it's not actually built into the product, then you only have 2 choices. That's if it's not a consumable, then you have to do something new. For example, unfortunately, there's a tech brand that I've been doing some coaching with. And unfortunately, that's what they ran into, is that it went so viral the first 18 months of their brand that they did over $10 million last year. But the problem is, I mean, they spent so much money. Just about everyone in the US that could have seen that product saw that product. And unfortunately, there's nothing new. And so what happened is now they've had diminishing returns because there's nothing new to offer those people. Okay, so number 1, retention revenue. All right, number 2, your pop-up conversion rate. I think it's important to mention, like, these are in specific importance order, but all 7 are critical. So pop-up conversion rate. So typically most stores that we see that come to us, their pop-up conversion rate is quite low. Typically we'll see most stores, they're like I hate to say it, but like 1% to probably 4%. I'd probably say 3 is about the average. Most stores are here. That is a terrible pop-up conversion rate. Now, you don't have a pop-up. You can have, for example, we have some of our beauty brands, instead of a pop-up, they have a quiz in the hero as a stable call out on their website. It's a quiz, or like a find the right blush for your skin tone, and that serves the same purpose as a conversion rate, but this is really poor. What you want to see, so really the gold standard, in my opinion, is you want your pop-up to be 7% to 10%. If you can do more, great. But the gold standard is this. If you can get your pop-up to this point, that is great. Now, I just want to show you in the math, why is this a problem? So let's just use the example 3%, because majority of brands that come to us that we have to fix all this for them is like 3% or less. Let's just use that example. So let's say your pop-up conversion rate is this. And let's say on average, because you're running advertising, you're driving about 1,000 visits a day to your store. Okay, so what that means is 1,000 times 3% is 30 people. Is 30 people a day you're getting their email or SMS, depending on if you collect both, for example. And typically, most pop-up welcome flows that we see convert at 10%. Now, typically after we get our hands on it, it's way more than that, but let's just say it's 10%. So what that means is based off your pop-up in this example, all the way down to the conversion rate of the people who sign up in that welcome flow who actually convert, only 10%. So what that means is you're only getting 3 sales a day. And so let's say for this example, let's say your average order value is $100. So really what you're making is $300 a day from this pop-up conversion rate in that welcome flow. So what happens if you 3x it? So for us, typically most of our pop-up conversion rates for our brands, for example, they are in the 7% plus. So what we'll do is we'll use 7% in this example. So keep that in mind. So you make $300 a day, $300 a day, and 3%. So what happens if you 2x that? Well, I'm sure you guessed it. So using that example, it would look like this. So at 7%, so 1,000 store visits times 7%, so 1,000 store visits times 7% pop-up conversion rate, that means you're getting 70 a day, 70 email addresses and or phone numbers a day, assuming the same conversion rate of the welcome flow, which for us, that's typically more than that 10%, times 10%, what is that? 7 sales a day. So at that $100 AOV, that would be $700 a day. So I'm sure you already guessed it, it's more than double. That's why this is important, because as a brand scales, so as you're scaling ad spend, you want this thing to be as high as humanly possible, because it's just more money. You don't have to work as hard to get people to buy. And so for us, while if a brand's making, typically a brand that's getting 1,000 store visits a day, we can actually calculate this real quick. Typically most store conversion rates are like a 1.5%. So typically if it's at a 1.5%, typically you're getting about 15 sales a day. So at that $100 AOV, you're getting about 1,500 a day. Why this is important is because, so just to kind of bring this home is, don't you see that even at this ratio, how important this is? It's almost half of what their total store sales are in a day coming from the pop-up conversion rate. And that's why this is so critical, that while a lot of people kind of discount it as like, oh, it's just a pop-up. Dude, pop-ups are one of the most profitable things an e-commerce business can do. So the more you can stress it to get this thing as high as possible and get that conversion rate and the flow as high as possible, it just makes so much more money. Okay, so that's number 2. The pop-up conversion rate is a very critical component to helping you scale. Let's move on to the next one. Product margins. Of everything that we've talked about so far, this is without a doubt the most important. I have seen, and by the way, we actually did a study. We worked with 362 brands over the last 6 years. And I can tell you without a doubt, this is probably one of the biggest brand makers or brand killers right here. Product margins is everything. So for example, most brands to even be able to scale need to be at a minimum 60% margins. This is the minimum. Ideally, the brands that we see are the most profitable and scale the best are at 75% plus margins. And we even have a couple brands are at 80% margins because they've scaled so much, they have economies of scale. They know how to negotiate with their manufacturers. They know how to negotiate with shipping companies to get the best deal. And they're crushing in that. And that's where we see the highest. So let's just kind of paint this as an example. Why is this so important? Well, I do want to say this is also based off your average order value. So typically I would say this is for most brands who are probably, I would say $200 AOV or less. Like we have some fashion brands that, they're at 75% margins on $200 AOV. And they're just freaking crushing so much profit. Yeah, so typically this, but if you have like over $500 or $1,000 plus AOV, you can survive off 50% margins. You can do that. I have seen that. But typically the most brands kind of sit here. So why is this important? And I don't want to insult your intelligence, especially if you guys some of you watching this are quite sophisticated e-commerce brand owners, but not everyone that watches this knows this. And to be really transparent with you, I was having a conversation with a founder literally last week, and they're doing about $175,000 a month, and they weren't sure 100% what their margins were. In addition to that, is they didn't know what was a good margin either. So don't be deceived. Like you can still make good money and not have this nailed down. So this is why when brands come to us, these are one of the things that we do is get really clear on the economics to make sure, do they have a model? And if they don't have a good enough business model, we'll help them change it, test pricing, test bundling, things like that. Okay, so let's take a a brand that sells sweatshirts. Very simple, right? So let's say I sell sweatshirts, and let's say the AOV is $60. This happens quite often with fashion brands. So let's say it's $60. What I see a lot of brands that come to us that are fashion is they don't want to be the most expensive brand that people are being served to. So they shoot for the middle ground. So they shoot for, I'm just going to be 50% margin. The problem with that is that 50% margin, $30. So what that means is you have $30 to spend money on ads and to get someone to buy. Just $30, okay? Now, why that becomes a problem is because also for you to also maintain your overheads, you have to have a lot of volume. Versus if you had, for example, what I see most brands after we work with them, you have 70% margins, you have $42 of gross profit. So what that means is you can spend money on advertising, and as long as you are under $42, you're actually profitable. Or in this case, if you're under $30, you're profitable. The difference between this big difference, in my opinion, and what I've seen, is the difference between a brand that's scaling and making a lot of profit and a brand that scales and is making no profit. Like that $12, especially at scale, makes a massive difference. Now, where this really compounds is, listen, I wish we could just spend money on ads on a product and then whatever profits on that first sale is our profit. But we all have overheads too, right? And so, for example, let's say you're a fashion brand, and let's say, just to be easy for keeping things round, you run a really lean team, and your overheads every single month. So, for example, that's like paying yourself and paying subscriptions and paying Shopify. And if you have like guys in the warehouse picking and packing, again, you're running a lean team and you are paying yourself very little, but let's say your overhead is $10,000. So let's say, for example, using $10,000 overheads, let's say you're running ads, okay? And let's say you're killing it. And I mean, you're doing really great. And at scale, you are acquiring a customer for $15, okay? $15. So what that means is you have $15 profit after ads, after your cost of goods, okay? So what that means is, in order for you to still be profitable, you still have to cover your overheads, right? So it's not you're making $15 in a sale, it's based off volume. So what that means is, in order for you, just to break even, you have to sell 666 orders at a $15 CPA and selling your average order value of $60 just to break even. So literally just to make $0. Once you get over that 666, and sorry, it just came out that way in the math, then you make your first order in profit. So what that means is, you'd have to spend at least 10 grand in ads. Now, whereas under a $42 CPA, and let's just say, assuming you acquired customers for the same rate, it will be significantly less orders. Now, the reason I bring this up is because you have to also hit a certain amount of volume to cover that. And that's why product margins become very easy, because in my opinion, if you have a $60 product, it's the same amount of effort to sell the product at the exact same rate. But if your margins are better, you make more profit. And in my opinion, it's the exact same amount of effort to sell a $60 product as it is to sell a $70 or an $80 product. Okay. So this lesson number one is have higher margins. And if you're not at that place, go negotiate, pick a different manufacturer. You need to find a way to get to that point, because once you get to that point, that can completely change your business. So we have a CPG brand that when they came to us, it was really bad. It was like 40%, but we increased prices. We did some bundles and we got them to 70% plus. And that difference completely changed them from losing money to actually making a good profit after that. So next one is average order value. This is an interesting one because we have a very recent example of a CPG brand that this was the number one bottleneck to them actually growing their brand. So this brand, they came to us. It was a CPG brand. They were selling a specific type of mushroom drink, and it was $22. The problem was that was their AOV when they came to us. The problem was it's really hard to make advertising make sense for a low average order value product online. It's really tough. I mean, typically what you want, and you can kind of store this away for yourself, is in my opinion, what you really want is you want to get to $60 as much as possible. So that's like a minimum AOV that I think is a good idea. Are there still brands who crush it? Absolutely. Like we have a few brands that are the $35 and $40, and just because of the brand, the product, the niche, and the margins, they're insanely profitable at $35, $40 average order value. But that's not always the case. But I digress. Why this is important is because at a $22 average order value, the best we can do is still only acquire a customer for $15. And that is dirt cheap. dirt cheap. And that's at scale. This brand is spending about $80,000 a month. And as you can imagine, it's really tough to grow a profitable business when you're only making $7 per order. Again, this isn't like a 9-figure brand that's got deep pockets and they've been around for 100 years. Now they're bootstrapped, right? So what we had to do is like, okay, well, how can we get to $60? What do we have to do to get to $60 as fast as possible? And what do we need to do? So one of the things that we did is on their checkout is we did these things. Instead of offering just a one-off package, what we did was we said, okay, if people are willing to spend for one, let's give them 3 options. Option number 1 is they can buy 2 for $40. 2 for $40. So they get a little bit of a discount, but 2 for $40. Option 3 is 3 for $60. Really good deal. And then 1 for $22. But just like a SaaS company, what we did was is we pretty much just said, this is best value, bang for buck. That's right. So we said this one's best value, this one's bang for buck. But what we did was we made sure on the store that this was pre-selected. So what that did was immediately overnight, their average order value jumped from $22 to $40. And because we had this option, we actually had a lot of people taking advantage. So their average order value is now somewhere in the $50 range. That's a massive difference. They went from $22 and making $7 on the first sale to actually making $21 on the first sale. So a 2x increase in how much money they made on the first sale, spending $80,000 a month. This is very important. Now, even if you don't have a low average order value product, I've seen this work for high-end fashion, for tech, for travel. You never deceive yourself thinking that people aren't willing to spend more with you or that people aren't willing to buy more than one product. Because from what I've seen, 15 to 20% of people will buy the one that has a higher average order value, especially if you use the marketing tactic that this is best value or best bang for your buck, right? Very critical. This brand, we increased their gross profit per order by 200%, and then the profit per order also by 200%. Very critical part. It was the difference, frankly, between them spending and not making any money, and now them actually making good profit. All right, next one, conversion rate. So this is an interesting story. So we had a brand that we worked with for quite some time, and this brand, they were bootstrapped, very good when it comes to their finances, but the fact that they were so good at it was a detriment to where everything was budgeted out so perfectly that they were unwilling to invest in their website. And at the time that we were working with them, their website had a 0.4 conversion rate. 0.4. So not 1%, but 0.4. It was atrocious. We kept telling them that this was their biggest issue with their brand, is if they didn't find a way to fix it, it was the thing that was going to hold them back forever. Well, fast forward was about 6 months of them saying, you have to fix this, you have to fix this. And finally, they got tired of hearing us say that, and they took the lead, they took the chance. And we had their website completely overhauled, redesigned. And honestly, it didn't make their conversion rate amazing after that because they were selling high AOV products. It was like in the $225 range was their average order value. But still, their website went from a 0.4 to a 0.98%. So not even over 1%, but again, a $22 average order value, a $220, excuse me. Their sales doubled overnight. It was, and this was several years ago, it was one of the great examples that forever taught my team that lesson, that conversion rate, whatever multiple you can increase it by, it literally prints money. So we have discovered over time where brands should sit in terms of average conversion rate. So from my experience, if your AOV is somewhere around $60 or less, you need to be somewhere in the 4% conversion rate range minimum. If you're not there, you need to experiment to get yourself there. But then if you are, from my experience, somewhere around the $200 range, typically we see brands there of like a 1.5 to 2%. And then if you are over $300, it can still actually make a lot of money, and you can be at 1% or like to 0.90%, right? And if you're over $1,000, it can be like 0.2%. And it can still work out quite well. So these are the ranges we have found over time that if a brand is not there and they're somewhere close to these ranges, something is up. Something is really bad. It's either the traffic they're getting is just really poor traffic, or there's something fundamentally wrong with the website. Because as I illustrated previously, any increase in your conversion rate literally prints you more money. And going back to this brand, it was a shoe brand. They overnight doubled their business just by doing that one thing. All right, next thing I'm gonna talk to you about is content. While that is obvious, hear me out. The brands that we scale, though, and the ones that get to $1 million a month, without a doubt, the one defining trait that separates a lot of those that don't is how obsessive they are at organic content. It's not just content, but organic content. Typically, those brands are posting on a magnitude 3 to 4 times more than the brands who aren't, and they're also scaling more. But in addition to that, why it's really important is because imagine, if you will, with me, you are making 3 to 4 times more content than you are previously. You're testing 3 to 4 more times than you were previously or your competitors are. So why I believe this is important is because let's say, for example, and by the way, if you can 10x increase your organic content, you will win. Absolutely, you will win. But let's say a lot of brands that we have seen, if they're running ads, for example, as a baseline, they will every week, they will make 3 new ads, right? So what that means is they're making 12 new ads a month. So if you're watching this channel, advertising and creative is a really big variable to being successful. And a lot of brands that come to us, at a minimum, they're doing like 3 new ads a week. Well, it's neither here nor there. It really depends on your ad spend. Let me tell you why this is important. But the brands that we see who are at least posting and making content, really it's like making content, and they're posting a minimum of 1 time a day. So it's once a day, and that's for an entire month. They have 30 pieces of content that is being tested organically to find out what works, what trends work, what angle works, what option works, what posts get the highest amount of engagement. So what that means is, in those same brands, typically because they have so much more content, in 1 week, for example, they're actually making a magnitude of 6 new creative a week, right? So what that means is that times 4 is 24. So you add that together between organic and ads that they're actually testing for advertising, for example, they are testing 54 pieces of creative, either organic or ads. And that is on a magnitude significantly more than this. And this is why, in my opinion, why the brands that we have that scale the most, why they win. It's because they are doing so much more creative than any other competitor that they work with. It really is a big competitive advantage, and I would even venture to say it's an unfair competitive advantage because they built the systems, the team, and the know-how to make that much amount of creative that you will win every single time compared to the person who does not win. And that's why one of the things that we look at when working with brands is we measure, okay, how much content are you making? Like, how are you making it? What's the system to use that you make it? And can you increase that? Because working with my team who are creative strategists, what we'll do is we'll feed their team angles and concepts. For example, like we're testing angles and concepts in the ads, but we'll feed them a long list of other angles and concepts. They get to test it organically. And so what that means is they test it organically. We get to see what works. And that's frankly less money that brand has to spend on ads because they're testing things organically as well as in the ad account. And so what that means is they are discovering the things that work at a magnitude and at a speed significantly more than brands who are just doing this. And I wish that wasn't the case, but a lot of brands, unfortunately, they're maybe posting once a week organically, if that, which is really sad. In this last one is going to be, in my opinion, what separates the people who really scale and are the most profitable versus those that don't, is knowing your brand's numbers. Now, I'm going to give you the exact numbers that you need to know, but the brands that we see have the most amount of success, they know these things like the back of their hand. So number one, what do they know? Well, first of all, is they know what their brand's break even is in terms of MER and volume, because this is important, is you must know at what volume of sales you also have to have to cover your overheads and at what ratio of return to also hit your profit targets. So those brands know that, hey, if I spend this much amount of money at a 3X, I need this much volume every single day. Or if I spend at a 2X, I need this much volume every single day to cover my overheads. The other one that they know is they set targets for new customers. For example, they set weekly or monthly targets of here's the number of new customers we must have every single month. And they set targets for returning customers. Here's some returning customers we need to get to come back this month as well. And what that does is it gives you the happy medium. For example, going back to the example I gave earlier in this video, if you're trying to make $500,000, right? And you know that 70% are coming from new, that's 70, and 30% are coming from returning, well, that means they set clear targets every week and every month to make that happen. The other thing is they know like the back of their hand what their COGS are, their cost of goods. And then they also know, to continue from that, they know the weight of their products and their packaging. Because for example, we have a brand that we're working with right now, and we saw that their ratios of their cost of goods was potentially holding them back from being more aggressive on spending money on ads. So when we brought it up to them, they said, you know what? We can actually change our packaging from this this to this, it will not only make the packaging 20 cents cheaper per package, but also it allows us to lower our weight so we can pay less on shipping. And they knew that so well that they knew, okay, we could actually lower our cost of goods by $1.75 if we make these changes. That's what I mean. It's like they know their business so well. They know exactly what they need to change to lower that cost of goods. And it also gives them more negotiation factors or more negotiation power with their manufacturers because they know their business better than their manufacturers do. The next one is they know their 30, 60, and 90-day LTV and profit of those customers. Why this is important is because I've made many videos about this. You can scale your business on a 30-day cashback, meaning, for example, let's say, for example, to make it really even, let's say, for example, I make $50 per order, okay? But I'm gonna spend $50 per order. What that means is you're making no money, right? That's your CAC. What these brands know is they say, for example, if they know that that $50 over 30 days turns into $75, then they know that I can afford to scale at break even because I know within 30 days, I'm going to make $25 extra. That's a really simple example. But then they know what it turns into 60 days and 90 days and allows them to make better scaling decisions. Because if you remember, if you know, for example, going back to that example I mentioned earlier, if you know that my new customers, that if I scale my new customers, and it kept going up. And I also know because of my business, because of my returning customer rate, things like that, if I also knew that as long as I kept acquiring new customers, this would also go up as well. Then dude, you could literally print money by scaling to different cash buybacks. For example, we have another brand, for example, that this is what we work with their CFO, where we're actually spending money on a 30-day break even because they know how good the returning customer rate is on 60 and 90, that as long as they can float that cash for 30 days and this keeps growing, we know this will follow suit, right? And so it becomes a cash flow management and just setting really clear targets. But dude, that is how a lot of these brands play the game. They're scaling aggressively. And the whole point I bring this up is you have to know these numbers. You have to be insanely clear. What do you want? What are you trying to get from it? Also, what is like my target CAC as well? And if you know those things, so if you circle back, if you know your brand's numbers like that, you know content, you're posting content, conversion rate, you get to that point, your average order value is healthy, your product margins are healthy, and your pop-up conversion rate is healthy, and your returning customer revenue is healthy, there is no reason your brand could not be scaling, being wildly profitable. Those are just 7 of the most critical components that I have found that allows a brand to scale or holds them back. So if you have questions on this, leave it in the comments. I'm happy to answer any questions because I know this is quite in depth. I know it's also quite nerdy, but I'm telling you, these are the things that my team has to stress when brands want to grow. We have to fix those issues first. So by the way, I actually teach this stuff inside of our mentorship group. So we have 34 brands in the mentorship group where we have weekly group calls. We have a 24/7 chat. We have other guest brand speakers come in to do talks in there as well. Super high value. A lot of the brands in there are growing because we cover these tactics and I tell them what you have to focus on to unlock your brand. So if that sounds remotely interesting to you, click the link below in the description to learn more about it. I'll see you in the next video.